ever thought about taking a solo trip to Walt Disney World, but just weren't quite ready to take the plunge? Today on Walt Disney World Adults Only, I'll talk about my experiences and share some tips that might help you decide. Welcome, Your Royal Highnesses. I'm Carol from Walt Disney World Adults Only, and today we'll explore some ways to make a solo trip fantastic. By solo trip, I mean travel and overnight accommodations. If you live local, hopping over to Disney for a day trip is no big deal. But if you feel uncomfortable going to the movies by yourself or out to dinner, a day trip to Disney can be as daunting as a whole week stay. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you some tips and tricks that will help you do either. I'll also try to list the pros and cons of a solo trip. There are two main reasons for a solo trip. One, you don't have anybody who loves Disney as much as you do, so you're forced to go solo if you want to visit the parks. Two, you really enjoy going to Disney by yourself. We'll examine both scenarios. First, let's talk about travel. If you live more than 6 to 8 hours away, and maybe even less, you're most likely going to fly instead of drive. While driving allows you to bring more things, cases of water, alcoholic beverages, lots of room for souvenirs on the way home, that's a long drive by yourself, and you're going to be exhausted when you get there. So the first downside or con of a trip solo is you have no one to share the driving. Flying will get you there faster and more rested, unless of course you're afraid of flying. That's a whole nother story. Good news, or a pro for flying solo, if you're booking last minute, it's a lot easier to snag one seat than two or more. Now, a big con of flying solo, if you need to go to the restroom or get a snack, you have to take all your stuff with you. Now, I'm sure the architects who designed those restrooms had to know that was a possibility, but they sure didn't give you a heck of a lot of room in those stalls. Cramming all that stuff in is difficult, and it's even more difficult trying to get yourself out. Speaking of flying, my first tip is to pack a box of wine or a bottle of your favorite liquor in your checked bags. There's three benefits to this. First, it's less expensive than buying at one of the resort bars or at the gift shop. Two, you might not feel comfortable sitting alone at a bar solo and still would like an alcoholic beverage. And three, that space in your luggage is now empty, and now you have room for some souvenirs to take home. Now, you could have your Uber driver stop at a liquor store or have it delivered to the resort, but if you have it delivered, you have to be there to show ID, and that takes some time. If you're like me, I want to get to the parks as soon as possible. The second tip for going solo, I do have a case of water and some breakfast snacks delivered to my resort, but I can pick those up at my convenience or have them delivered. Notice I'm assuming you're staying on property for your solo trip. It really makes so much sense to do so. Disney transportation and the resorts are so safe. That's one less thing you have to worry about. You can be the last one in a park and feel perfectly safe, or as you're going to the resort late at night, there's no problems. So which resort do you stay at? Unfortunately, that might be a con of traveling solo. Now you have to foot the bill for the resort room all by yourself. Now, if you usually go with your partner or spouse, that point is moot because it's a household expense. But if you travel with a group of friends, you're able to share expenses for that room, so you might book a more expensive resort. Now, a pro side for going solo, it's just you and your luggage. So a value resort, while it might be crowded for a group of 4, has plenty of room for just you and your stuff. Now, most moderates and all the deluxes have indoor walkways that might give you an extra layer of safety. You might feel more safe at night walking through those indoor walkways than at the outdoor walkways that you're going to find at the value resorts. My last solo trip, I stayed at Pop Century and I felt perfectly safe, but that's a personal preference. Another pro for going solo, and if it's in your budget, you get to choose the resort you stay at. If you travel with your parents and they always have to stay at the Coronado, or your spouse has to be on the monorail resorts, doesn't matter. This is your trip. You can pick where you want to stay, your favorite, or maybe try someplace new. Solo trips are all about you. You. It's the one time you get to pamper yourself and not feel selfish doing it. So you got up at dark 30 to catch your flight. You're really excited about going to the parks, but when you finally get there, you are just exhausted. Going solo, you don't have to disappoint anybody if you decide to take a quick nap, a shower, and then hit the parks. Another pro, you don't have to stand in line for a shower. It's just you. Another big tip, since you're traveling solo, you will get more done in the same amount of time than if you were traveling with your spouse or a group of people. You have the luxury of taking that little cat nap and still getting to see everything you want to see. That's another pro for rope dropping. You can still sleep a little later and get ready and still get to rope drop because you're not waiting in line for the bathroom. Now let's talk about that first group of travelers going solo. So far this all sounds great, but you're just not comfortable going alone. Remember, Disney is a magical place. People are willing to talk to you in line, at dinner, at one of the shops. Don't hesitate to strike up a conversation. You really don't want to go alone the whole trip for a whole week? Our Facebook group has over 100,000 members. Most likely one of our members is going to be at a park the same time you are. Let us know when you're going on our Facebook page, and someone might stop by to say hello or even meet you for a Dole Whip. In fact, on my last solo trip, I was at Epcot and posted some pictures to the Facebook group. All of a sudden my phone started ringing. Friends of mine were at Magic Kingdom and I didn't know they were there. They hopped over to Epcot. I adjusted my solo dining reservation and we had an impromptu dinner party. I think the theme for a solo trip should be spur of the moment. You know how when you're on any vacation, in the back of your mind you're always thinking about the other people you're traveling with. Are they having fun? Do you have to compromise to make sure they get to do the things they want, even if they're not the top of your list? Well, on a solo trip, you don't have to do that. Like, Disney isn't complete if they don't ride Thunder Mountain, and the line is so long. That's okay. You're not disappointing anyone if you decide to skip it or come back later. There's no one else there to disappoint. Or you know the look you get when you're with the group and you say you want to ride Kilimanjaro Safaris for the 10th time that trip? Doesn't matter. When you're by yourself, your whole day could be spent riding Kilimanjaro Safaris. If you purchase Genie Plus, and that's $15 a day per person per day, and it's only you that you have to pay for. Another pro to going solo. Why wouldn't you pay for it? So now you can book that morning which ride you don't want to stand in line for. And then after you're done with that, you can book another. So that really adds to the spontaneity. I think that's really going to be a big benefit. Inside the parks are the easiest places to go solo. Everyone else is rushing to get to dinner or to their favorite shop or to their favorite attraction. So you're pretty much invisible. And when you're standing in line, most everyone is on their phones anyways. So technically, they're all solo as well, even though they may be in a group. That's not to say you can't strike up a conversation with the people in line next to you, but you don't have to feel uncomfortable if you don't. There's even a special thing for solo travels called single rider line. Now, it's not just for solo travels, anybody can use it, but it's a benefit when you're going solo. Mount Everest, Rock and Roll Roller Coaster, Test Track, and Smuggler's Run all have single rider lines. They use those lines to fill up the vehicles faster. Now, there's no guarantee that you'll get on the ride faster, but generally you do. Just another tip, and another good reason to go solo. My biggest tip for traveling solo in the parks is take time to enjoy the surroundings. When you're in a group going someplace, you're having a conversation, you're worried about the other person. This is all about you. Take the time to look around and really soak in that Disney magic. When they're offered, take a backstage tour to learn even more. You're only paying for yourself. Maybe relax by the pool during the day and take in an after-hours event that are generally less crowded and usually have less kids. People always question, should they get Memory Maker on a solo trip? I say go for it. Do you really want to remember your whole trip by a bunch of selfies or having to rely on the kindness of strangers to take your picture? Remember, if rides are your thing, you'll have time to go on a heck of a lot more rides, which means you'll have more ride photos. And don't forget the magic shots either. So what is the biggest con of traveling solo, in my opinion? Probably meal times. If you're social and like a good sit-down meal with good conversation, that might be limited on a solo trip. There are great quick service restaurants, and you can people watch and enjoy the scenery if you want to go that route. One of my favorite places is in the very back of Flame Tree Barbecue, where you overlook the water and Mount Everest. That's a great place just for some alone time. Maybe you don't want a meal at all. You want to fill up on festival offerings. Or fill up on Mickey bars and churros. There's no one there to judge you. You can eat whatever you want. After saying that, you might be surprised at my next tip. Remember how I said resorts were a con because you didn't have anybody to share expenses? Well, going to signature restaurants, you don't have to share a bill. Well, going by yourself instead of paying for two or more at a signature restaurant is a huge plus. Now, I brought my Kindle with me thinking that I might be uncomfortable and wolf down my food instead of savoring it, but honestly, I never used it once. At the boathouse, I was seated outside at a small two-top right next to the water's edge, overlooking the outside bar in Disney Springs. I was able to watch the aqua cars go in and out, and it was a great spot for people watching. I loved it. At the Brown Derby, I had one of the last reservations of the night, so the cast member wasn't that busy, and he chatted with me throughout my meal. At table service restaurants, I was afraid that cast members might be disappointed in a single diner, because a single diner obviously would have a smaller bill than a group of 2 or 4. And I thought they might want to rush me through my meal. I found the opposite was actually true. They were very gracious, gave recommendations about food and beverages, asked about my day in the park, and told me how they like to spend their days in the park. They were really quite wonderful. I wouldn't say they hovered around me, but they were very cognizant of where I was in my meal. I never waited for another drink or my dessert. Now, my trick for having a great time going solo at a table service restaurant, go where something else is going on at that restaurant. Go to Sanaa and ask for a window seat so you can enjoy the animals as you eat. At Chefs de France, ask for a table near the window so you can watch people walking by, and if you're lucky, the mime acrobats might be performing. At Coral Reef, you can enjoy the fish in the aquarium as you eat. California Grill, Topolino's, Rose and Crown, fireworks. You get the picture. So we've covered inside the parks and dining. What about going solo outside the parks? Maybe you want to tour the resorts along the Skyliner or the monorail. And you can wander through them, stop and get something to eat or maybe a cocktail, Again, it's up to you. If you're at Disney in a season where the parks close rather early, or for a destination in itself, you might want to go to Disney Springs. Now, if you're used to going to a store or a mall by yourself, same thing. So you won't feel uncomfortable at all at Disney Springs going solo. But the big pro for going solo at Disney Springs, you can browse as slowly as you want through as many stores as you want and buy as many souvenirs as you want without anybody giving you that eye. You know, the one, haven't you spent enough? After a long day in the park, I like to relax. When I'd return to Pop, I'd grab a glass of wine, my Kindle, and head out to the spot just to the left as you were crossing the bridge to get to the Skyliner. It was recessed, had a whole bunch of benches, and no one was ever there. So I'd have my wine, read the Kindle, look at the lights of Art of Animation in the background. It was wonderful. Even though it was quite late, I always felt safe. Have I convinced you to try a solo trip? Please tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear any ideas you might have to make a solo trip even more phenomenal. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so and hit the bell so you know when new videos come out. If you're not a member of our Facebook group, Walt Disney World Adults Only, please join us. It's a great place to talk adult-only trips. We'd love to have you. The link is in the description below. And remember, never grow up.